Okay, so today I know it's quite. I think I've got quite a mixed audience. I know it's kind of vision science, but yeah. So hopefully I kind of got the pitch right. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but yeah, hopefully there's something for everybody. So I'm going to be talking today about sign language recognition, translation, and production. Hopefully the slides are going to work. So just a bit of an overview of the talk. I'm going to introduce myself and where I'm from, and then I'm just going to set the scene with a little bit of history. So this will be familiar to some people, but it's quite nice to look back at how the field of computer vision in general has evolved. And I'm going to do that to kind of place myself in it and some of the work that I've done over the years. And then, as James said, today I'm going to focus on sign language. So I'm going to introduce sign language because I think I want to dispel some myths, first of all. I think computer vision as a field tends to oversimplify what it is. They think it's just gesture recognition. So just talk a little bit about what sign is, some of the projects that we've got going on in sign, and what's coming out of that, tools in terms of assessment, in terms of annotation, and recognition. And I want to make this kind of firm distinction between translation and recognition, because I think we have treated it very much like a glorified gesture recognition approach. But as technology's moved on, neural machine translation, and access to data, we're starting now to finally, and it's only fairly recently, to actually look at it as a proper translation problem. And even now we're only scratching on the surface of the complexity of what is a very rich language, natural language, visual natural language. And then just to say a little bit about production, which is something that I've always shied away from, sign language production, but it's something that we started to work in, and then just summarise the talk. So I am Richard Bowden, as you know. I'm Professor of Computer Vision and Machine Learning at the University of Surrey, and I lead the Cognitive Vision Lab. So this is a picture of the lab. This is the last picture we had really before we all went into lockdown. So some of these people have left, and actually, I guess it's very good. And partly the reason that I'm so disorganized, but we've had far more people join the lab than we have leave, which has been interesting. And I'm sure, how do you bring new people into a group during lockdown? I think we've got it down to a T now, but it involves an awful lot of Zoom meetings and an awful lot of Discord and things like that. But yeah, so you can tell. So I'm the old one. The one in the middle. And actually, this is the thing. So there's a fair few academics here. It's worth pointing out that we get older, but our research groups always stay the same age. And the older we get, the more troublesome that becomes, because we get older, but PhDs are always, what are they? Post-grad, about 25, let's say. RAs, late 20s, 30s, and the poor professors are getting older and older, and more disconnected from the people that are actually doing the work. But like I say, so I run the Cognitive Vision Lab within the Centre for Vision, Speech and Signal Processing, which is a very large research group. I think we're currently about 200 people at the University of Surrey. So it's a very large. It's not all vision now. So what we have is this kind of core of AI and machine learning, and then we're made up of these little labs. And that covers not only my area, which is the Cognitive Vision Lab, but we've got biometrics in there, we've got medical imaging in there, and audio and signal processing. So, but you can sort of see that actually it is all about signals, and and there is a core of AI there. So much so that actually this week, Tuesday, was the launch of the Surrey People-Centered AI Institute, and CVSSP kind of forms the heart of that, but reaching out to lots of other areas of the university. So this C Lab, our activities look slightly eclectic, so you've got things like robotics, autonomous systems, human understanding, sign and the gesture, non-verbal communication. But for me, it's not eclectic at all. It's all about people. So, because it doesn't matter whether it's sign, which I'm going to be talking about today, where we're trying to interpret or understand what somebody is doing, or whether it's the autonomous vehicles. There, I tend to be more interested in the behaviour. So it's what can we learn from people? Can we predict their behaviours? So for me, it's not really as eclectic as it might seem. There is a common theme, and that's to do with people. At the moment, though, we do have these kind of two main funding streams. So there's one funding stream which is to do with the robotics and autonomous systems, and the vision, because fundamentally I am computer vision, but the vision that kind of supports that. And then the other funding stream is on the sign language. So here's another picture of part of the group with my other hat on. So this is in what we affectionately call our robotics lab. It's a tiny, tiny little lab. You've got the Surrey autonomous testbed, which is, this is the car that I sort of said, unfortunately, just before lockdown, I disassembled quite a large amount of it and I've left it. I don't even know where the screws are to put it back together. So I'm going to have, and it's due to go for its MOT. In fact, it's overdue for its MOT, which is its road test. So I have to put this car back together at some point, which is going to be fun. But this is something that on my weekend, I did do it on my weekends going, and it's a Renault Twizy, a small electric vehicle, and basically we just instrumented it largely for data collection. So it's got an NVIDIA PX2 in there. It's got Seconics cameras around and a LiDAR. I mean, the sort of work that goes on in there, things like, so this is some work on feature representations here. This is just for stereo matching, but we've done quite a lot of work with kind of cross season, or day and night. What feature representation, deep feature representations can we learn that allow us to kind of match, that is invariant to some of the natural things that obviously from the computer's point of view make it look completely different. But if we look at the scene, the tree with leaves on, or the tree, tree in the summit, it's still a tree. So it's can we learn these invariant representations? Also, some work. This is some recent work we're doing on BEV estimation. So rather than going through the kind of standard projected geometry, can we train networks that actually directly just take an image in and then directly produce these kind of semantic top-down views? And these are really useful for robotics, for path planning, because it's such a natural domain, this top-down view of the world to do our path planning in. There's a picture of Kellen with some VR visualization as well. So that's kind of the robotics hat, and you are kindly going to allow me to come back after Christmas and bore you rigid on that side of the research. But today I'm going to be talking about the sign. And as I said, I wanted to start just initially with a bit of history. So this is, I mean, some of you out there are computer vision people. So, and we could argue when computer vision started, but I've got my year zero is kind of 1966. So Minsky sort of like vision, you've got a robot, and by the end of the summer, he sets a summer project that by the end of the summer, right, vision is going to be solved. As simple as that. So make the robot see. Arguably, we could sort of take things back a little bit earlier, so some of the, the earlier work on optical flow and things like that. But before the 1950s, I am delineating as BCV. So that's before computer vision. And before computer vision, there was nothing. There was just monkeys in a desert, basically beating a monolith, right? But I pressed the button too quickly. So from that kind of 1950s, we can roll out. There's no favoritism here. I've just kind of picked some popular papers which you'll recognise. So things like Ransack, AdaBoost, Support Vector Machine, SIFT. But I stopped at 2011, which is when Microsoft kind of released the Kinect. And I think this was a landmark for computer vision, because it was one of the first times that vision, arguably image processing was on cameras before, so, smile detection and things like that. But this was vision in the living room. And so that was quite nice. We got deep learning again. It kind of went mad. We all resisted for as long as we could, but we had to jump on the bandwagon. So we're going to be talking a lot about deep learning. But again, 2014, slamming a vacuum cleaner. So again, I think this is another landmark, vision in the living room. And then, there's lots of things I could add to this, but as a random things, AlphaGo, Uber crashes, things like that. Off in the future, of course. Actually, I think over this time, the field has grown massively. And CVPR 2019, which was the last real conference we had before lockdown, 10,000 attendees. So it's a huge field. And then if we wanted to try and categorize the domains, then you could sort of say, well, back in the early days, vision was AI, and it was born from AI. And at some point, well, I mean, AI has been it's a bizarre term, isn't it? Because it became almost redundant. You know, we stopped using it. It was that thing that people used to do back in the 1970s. And it's been repopularized. So, of course, everybody now does AI again. But vision AI, then vision it became very much about projected geometry. It then moved into machine learning and applications. And then from that, it became big data. And big data then led into where we currently are, which is this kind of deep learning revolution. And I'm not going to go into sort of like waves of AI and things like that. But importantly, off in the future, we do have this singularity. All right, so it's a nice back. We've got monkeys at one end, and I've got the end of the world at the other. Now, it depends which futurologist we choose to believe. But I think actually this is quite a good way of posing. People sort of say, when are you going to solve sign language recognition? Well, given that the singularity is arriving in 2045, one assumed before then, right? So one assumes before AI takes over the world that I will have solved sign language recognition. We will have all of the problems that we're currently doing deadly battle with will have gone away. I mean, I think the nice thing is, so 2045, it's a bit scary because it's actually not very far away. I'll be retired. Will I be retired? I'll be emeritus, won't I? Good academics don't retire, they just become emeritus. So I'll be emeritus by then. So it probably won't be my problem. But anyway, well, he's going off on a tangent. So I entered the field around about there. So I'm on the cusp of projected geometry and machine learning. And then if you kind of look at this kind of same timeline in terms of the projects that I've been involved with over that time, and these are kind of significant projects, then you can sort of see that actually, autonomous cognitive robotics, things like that, has been fairly consistent throughout the years. But also this sign language, it's not something that I've just picked up 5 minutes ago. It's something that's kind of been, it goes even back to my PhD. And in fact, if you expand this to kind of related areas of like faces, lip reading and behavior, then it's actually a fairly consistent part of the portfolio over the years. So today I'm going to, like I say, talk about sign language recognition, translation and production. Now, the first thing I said is I wanted to dispel some myths. So what is sign language? So first of all, sign language is a visual language and it's the native language of deaf communities. Right? And it's important to remember that because every time we forget that, we upset them as a community. And in fact, every time we try and solve this problem for the poor deaf people without actually involving them, we upset them. So it's important to, there is a community out there, and this is their native language, and it is as rich as any spoken language, if not more so. I mean, there's grammatical constructs that exist in sign that just don't really have much of an analogy in spoken language. But it's important to remember that it is their first and primary language, and for various historical reasons, you often find that the written language skills of somebody from the deaf community is often quite poor. Bear in mind that, because written language is just it's a representation of the spoken language, and that's not their primary language. And education has, certainly in the UK, failed these communities. And, one of the first things you need to do is learn a bit about the history of kind of deaf communities and to understand why they feel the way they do about things. But every country has its own sign language and regional dialects, and quite often this is seems to be a surprise to some people. They go, "Oh, what? There isn't just one sign? Every country's got their own sign language," and it's like common sense. It's like Esperanto. There isn't one spoken language, is there? And if we think about how languages evolve, and they do that, through face-to-face communication. It's only sort of like nowadays where we have the ability to talk to anyone, anywhere, that means that we need to, get over some of these language barriers. Normally, as you learn to speak from the people around you, and if you never left your village, then why would you ever learn anything other than the language of that village? And this means that the regional dialects for sign language are as different as between two different countries sometimes. So, you know, to understand BSL, British Sign Language, it's not just about the sign. You know, when you're learning, you think, well, that's not very fair. You just asked me a question about, you know, using a lexicon that I've never seen before. You know, there's signs from Glasgow, but it's BSL. You know, and if you're, it's like being able to understand the dialects of the Glaswegian. You know, it's very hard, but you know, it's still part of the language. So we've got these huge regional dialects in sign. There's no simple mapping from spoken language to sign. So there is, and we'll see. I mean, there's no ordering. Quite often, you will sort of see somebody translating sign word by word as if it was English language, and that's called sign-supported English. You know, it has the grammar of the spoken language. But it also doesn't have any really of the grammatical constructs that sign would have. So it's not just about a reordering of the order of words. It's also things like placements. So, I mean, so in sign, you've got things like role shift. And so I can put people in space, and then I can use a turn of my body to sort of say, he said this, and they said that, and then he said this, and they said that. But I can also use directional verbs. So if you know, so I live in England here, and then I've got America, you know, over here, and then I can sort of say, you know, I know I'm talking to somebody from Canada, but I don't know the sign for Canada. Do I know the sign for Canada? Anyway, I'm going up to Canada. So you know, but I can fly, and I'm flying from England to Canada, you know, and I could sail across. Sorry, to America. I can sail across as well. But these verbs are directional. And so where I have placed things in space and the directionality of those verbs is sort of like all part of that the communication system. And that makes it like incredibly complex. And you know, these are things that we completely gloss over at the moment. You know, I think we alternate between deterministic systems where over the years, with deterministic systems where we try and build these grammars in, and then you know, machine learning and statistical approaches where you just haven't got enough data to sort of like capture the subtleties and complexities. And you know, I think the solution is somewhere in the middle. But that, you know, I'm going to start talking about like DARPA's third wave AI and things if I'm not careful. So, okay, so we've got these kind of complex things that are going. And sign also uses various channels or articulators. So you've got hands, and that's the one that everybody kind of thinks of. You know, you've got hands moving around. But it's also the non-manual aspects, non-manuals, which is the body and the face. So for instance, I'll give you an example. So this is the BSL sign for far. So I'll just read. But if I go and emphasize it with my face, then that means it's a long way. And if I kind of raise my eyebrows and give it a bit of a nod, then I can kind of turn it into a question. Is it far? So it's the kind of these non-manuals that kind of add, you know, modify basically the meaning of this discrete set of signs. As I said previously before, it's kind of important that a lot of this field is done without the deaf community and specifically done with complete ignorance of both the language and the culture. And that is, you know, it's probably the worst thing we can do, and it's self-perpetuating. And actually, it's lack of understanding that just alienates again and again and again. And the common joke in the deaf community is about gloves, data gloves, because every single, you know, it's almost like every couple of months there is another school kid that does a little project where they get an Arduino and some accelerometers and some strain gauges. They put it on a glove and they do a little finger spelling thing, and it's great, you know. It's a school project. It was a great school project for them, but the press get hold of it, and then the press go, you know, 15-year-old child solves sign language recognition, right? And it goes ballistic everywhere. You know, it's always sensationalized by the press. And it's just, and the deaf community just go, you've got to be joking. You know, not again. This is the 50th time this year, let alone, you know, and it's been going on now for 30 years. And from their point of view, part of the problem is that nobody ever asked them what, you know, you just did that without really knowing what the problem was you were trying to solve in the first place. Nobody asked whether actually we wanted it, you know, so it causes huge amounts of animosity between these kind of hearing communities that think they're trying to be clever and trying to help, but doing so without really understanding the problem or the community that they should be working with and for. And I think the last point is it's important to remember that the deaf actually don't see themselves as disabled, right? You know, deaf are hugely proud to be deaf, right? They are, you know, it's not a disability. So sign language, they are members of a linguistic minority community, right? And they're very proud of that. And these are all the things that actually, if we want to work in this area, we need to work with them. We need to understand these things so that we're working with them, not alienating them. Okay, right, so I've got off my soapbox now. So now a little bit about some projects. So first of all, we've got Extol, and this is a UK-funded project collaboration between the University of Surrey, University of Oxford, so the team led by Andrew Zisman over there, and then we've got linguists at DCAL, which is UCL. We've got deaf representation both in the project but also in the advisory board. And this project has two fundamental objectives. So one is to generate linguistic tools for annotation. So it's working with the linguists to try, because they've got the data, but they don't have enough data in order for us to really tackle the problem. We also need to be putting these inductive priors into the systems, you know, these inductive priors in terms of how the language works, and that requires linguistic understanding. So they don't have the data, but it's incredibly expensive. So if we can give them, you know, incredibly expensive to annotate, so if we can give them some tools back to increase the amount of data that they can annotate and increase their understanding, then in turn that feeds back into us as data hungry kind of machine learning people. We've got Smile 2, and this is a project between, it's funded by the Swiss Research Council, the SNSF. It's led by EAP in Martigny, and then we've got University of Surrey, we've got HFH and University of Zurich. Again, deaf team members, two objectives here, and this is about language learning. So it's about what tools can we provide to help language learners, but importantly assess language learners. And this is specifically looking at L2 learners. So we're not talking about native deaf signers, but hearing people who are learning to sign as a second language. And we just started the second phase of Smile. Easier started about the same time, back in January, and this is a massive EU project, very ambitious. Basically, you know, the EU don't pull their punches. You know, they wrote this called basically solve sign language recognition. So we're going to, you know, do as much as we can. You know, and if you could do that on a mobile phone while you're at it, that would be great. Thanks. But this is a very strong consortium. We've got most of the linguistic partners from across the whole of Europe, and what we're doing is basically trying to pool as much of the linguistic data that we can, so that we can actually kind of use that to bootstrap some of the more impoverished, from a linguistic point of view, sign languages. Yeah. So what core technology is in development? So first of all, we've got some tools for assessment, and this goes back to that Smile one. So this is, like I said, designed for L2 learners. The idea is the user is asked to perform a sign, and the prompt can either be given as a video, which makes it a repetition test, or given as an English gloss or a word, and therefore it becomes a memory. The user signs, and then we provide some basic feedback that compares what the user has done and compares that with the native deaf signer. So back then we were using a Connect, that has its own issues, inaccuracy and things, but obviously things have come on a lot. So I mean, I've got some slides in a while. You know, everything now is more CNN based, so open pose and holistic and variants like that. So you could see here where it's highlighting that her hand was incorrect, and that was how she could improve her sign. And then what we did is we kind of gamified this. So it was dressed up in a system that either allowed you to basically practice or run it as a test. And so it would go through, ask you all the questions, and then it would give you a score sheet at the end here. So an overall score for how you performed, and then you could click on each of these little X's, and that would take you to that feedback side to sort of say, oh, well, your hand shape was wrong, you were signing too slowly, your sign space is too large, things like that. Now, this was Smile 1, it's quite old now, and we're working with Connect. It was also isolated. We're just starting Smile 2. The fireworks are starting. It is bonfire now. We start now in Smile 2. We're looking much more. It's at centres repetition. And I'm specifically interested in the non-manuals because it's one of the aspects. A lot of the research focuses so much on the hands and the hand motion, but it's only such a small part of the language. It's these non-manuals that add a lot of the information and the colour. But you don't get non-manuals unless you're looking at continuous sign. So that's where we're going in Smile 2. We've also got these tools for annotation that we're developing. And the first one we're interested in here is hands. So this is some work we did a while ago, again with a depth camera and deep learning. And this is a real-time kind of hand tracking system, single-threaded. Yeah, just running in real time on a standard desktop PC. So you think, oh, well, hand pose estimation is solved. Well, the trouble is that the data where we need to be able to do hand pose recognition or estimation is not, with somebody like a couple of meters in front of a depth camera. And what we can't afford to do is to capture all the data again from scratch. So the sorts of data that we're working with is data that looks like this. Data that was potentially captured on a VHS recorder, because the linguists have already invested 20 years of their life into studying this video data. So then you can't convince them that they should just drop all of their existing data and start again from scratch. So we're a little bit stuffed by the fact that actually we've got to work with data that is not only old, it wasn't captured with us in mind. It was captured for linguistic purposes. So there is no calibration. There's no synchronized cameras. There's lots of things that we have to do deadly battle with. And this is an annotation tool. There's several annotation tools out there. This is Elan. We also work with Hamburg in various projects, and they use ILEX, or they developed ILEX. And what we're trying to do is to work with them to build these tools that they can use in their annotation. And this is just a very simple one, which is looking at hand shape. So we've got a simple tool here. On the left, we've got video sequences. Well, it's one video sequence that's been broken down into portions. Because normally what happens is that the annotator will go in, the first thing they do is they break it up into segments. This sign, this sign, this sign, this sign, and then they will go through and try and work out whether they've got that lexical item already there. And they never, to be honest, they never get to the point of annotating the non-manuals because it's so expensive and so laborious. But I'm going off on a tangent. So what we've got is a load of videos on the left. We've got a panel here that just shows the user what that hand shape is in the context of the video. And then we've got some basic controls. And what we've got is the output from a CNN. So this is just a reasonably deep CNN that's been trained on, I don't know how many, it was originally trained on 1 million frames. It's probably about 5 million now. It's a lot. Because every time we get some annotators to use it, we take that training data and then we feed it back in. So, and what we're doing is, because the classifier is not accurate, but neither is the human, and actually that's an interesting point. So the classifier isn't accurate, but what we can use is just the outputs from the classifier to basically give a ranked list to the user. And if it was working well, then they would just be clicking on one all the time. The trouble is that the people don't annotate what they see; they annotate what they understand. And I'm sure I'm preaching to the converted a bit here, given the people in your area. But this is it. I mean, not only are they looking, they kind of know, even if they sort of see one hand shape, and there's some examples here in this video. They see one hand shape, but they know that the person is signing something else. So they know it should be a slightly different hand shape. And then the real question is, what do you annotate? Do you annotate what you see, or do you annotate what the signer was meant to sign? And the problem is, because we're adding this back in, and these inaccuracies in the labeling then sort of like serve to make the tools even worse. Why is it not playing? So there's just an example here where you can sort of see this hand shape in context. The classifier has ranked it, and that handshake is number 2. The user picks number 2. So it's just a tool to help speed up going through and annotating these handshapes. And then this is it. Every time this gets used, we retrain these models. Now we've got kind of a load of tools that are currently under development. By June, we want to release them publicly. So there are things like finger spelling detection, handshape detection, which is the one you just saw. We've got some large-scale sign spotting. So this is recognition, basically allowing us to take a library, I'm going to talk about it in a second, but take a library of prototypical or dictionary signs and then try and find them in continuous video. And all of these things really for us are leading up to video alignment. What we need to be able to do is align huge quantities of data. So we've got large amounts of broadcast data where we can take things like subtitles and the video. But the alignment between the two, I'm going to start talking about NMT in a second. To do that NMT, neural machine translation, we need pairs. We need to know that this sentence corresponds to this sequence of video. We've also, as I mentioned, things like OpenPose and Holistic. We've been retraining our own, because the trouble is that a lot of the tools that are available, are phenomenally good, but they fail. Their failure cases are sign, because something like OpenPose, which is trained, to estimate the pose of somebody standing on their hands. Well, people don't stand on their hands when they're signing. What they do is they interact. They have hand-to-hand interactions and they have hand-to-face interactions, and these are all the failure cases of things like OpenPose and Holistic. So we spent some time retraining models. You can see here. So this is OpenPose by default, and this is a retrained one that's been retrained to basically be specific to sign. So we sacrifice generality for better performance in the domain where we want it to perform. And we've also, this is skeletal correction. We've also face and gesture, which is coming up this autumn. Oh no, actually, this was last year. Was it? Okay, anyway, this is skeletal. So basically what we did, we trained a BERT model. So basically unsupervised transformer model, where we take the skeletal data and then we deliberately corrupt it and we train it to correct it. And that just means that we've got a very simple way of basically passing data through and doing some standard corrections. You can sort of see in this middle here. I just realized if I've been pointing at slides, you can't see I've been pointing at the wrong monitor. But you can see here where there's some failures in the skeletal estimation, and Skeletor is corrected them. And the reason we called it skeletal was because we thought we were being funny. Because if anyone's read a BERT paper, it's got Sesame Street in, yeah. So with Skeletor, so we put pictures of Skeletor in from the cartoons back in the 1980s, and the reviewers said we were being childish and unprofessional, and we needed to take the pictures of Skeletor out. It's just like they've got no sense of humour. It's like, anyway, science. So we've also, I sort of said about large spotting. So we've been training again a transformer. This is transformer architecture to allow us to take continuous footage. So these blue ones are continuous footage on the right, and on the left, what we've got is isolated instances of signs from a dictionary. And we've trained a transformer to basically solve some of the domain adaptation issues so that we can go through and find these isolated examples. So this is good because you need to train to do the domain adaptation, but I don't need to train for every single sign because I've got a canonical one from a dictionary there. And the results are things like this. So this is a query from a dictionary, and here is the continuous sequence. You can see the ground truth marked in red, where the linguist has said that's where the sign occurs. And green, this is the output of this little transformer network. It's not a little transformer network, but this is the output of the transformer network that basically says where it thinks the sign exists. So look, missed that one. What's the next one? Play. There you can see the play sign. The problem with all of these, this is Phoenix as well. We're going to come back to Phoenix, this is a very common data set used for the NMT, the sign language translation work. And this was taken from German weather broadcasts. Yeah, so it's a much simpler data set. And that kind of leads me on to recognition versus translation. Did we start very late?
No, we started probably around 8 minutes after 2 or something. So don't.
No, you're right. I'm already 45 minutes in. I need to. I'll pick it up.
Okay.
Okay. So sign recognition versus translation. So going back to 2004, what I did was I basically picked up a dictionary and a book on sign linguistics, and I tackled the problem like that. So I sort of said, oh, well, this is the way the linguists represent data. They talk about the hands, and they talk about the hand shape, and they talk about the hand location and the hand arrangement, and whether the hand is in contact with the face or the body, whether the right hand is higher than the left hand, whether the hands are moving in unison. And what we did is we basically encoded, did some basic tracking in the image, and then we encoded everything at kind of this linguistic level. And then we had the kind of space, well, you know, the temporal aspect. We recognized these symbols in this stage 2 classifier. And this worked really well, you know, because it doesn't really matter whether you've got a big frame or a small frame. You know, if my hand is in touch with my face, your hand is in touch with your face, you know, the right symbols are firing. And so you've got some noise in there due to the symbols, but actually it generalizes remarkably well. And all the way through, we've always kind of tried to take this kind of inspiration from the linguist. And even now where we're doing the end-to-end stuff, and it's kind of all neural networks, it's still very keen that either what comes out of the network reflects what we know from linguistics, or we can put some of this linguistic knowledge in in the form of inductive priors to try and solve the problem. So we started off with manuals, and between 2004 2010, it was all that. Then we started to look at mouthings. Now, mouthings, I talked about non-manual features before. So you've got mouthings and mouth gestures. So that's the BSL sign for easy. The noise doesn't really make that much difference, but the cheek puff does. So that means easy. Now, that's a mouth gesture, but what you also get are mouthings. And so when somebody is signing, you'll get artifacts from spoken language that kind of are represented on the lips. And it's really sort of like, you know, so for instance, you might have mountain or Alps, something like that, a single sign, but whether I'm saying Alps or mountain depends really on what's on the lips. Now, mouthings are a bit funny because the mouthing has got more to do with the contact with the spoken language than the sign itself. Right? So mouthings are a part of sign, but how much somebody mouths depends on their exposure to spoken language. Because if you're deaf, you will use a minimal amount of mouthing, just enough to distinguish between these two forms of the sign. Whereas if you're hearing, you know it comes from the word Alps or mountain, so you're much more likely to mouth the whole word, if that makes sense. So there is no hard and fast rule as to how this works. I'm going to skip this slide. So what we started doing is we started working with forced alignment. So we can, if you know that there is going to be potentially this word represented on the lips, then what we would do is we would have multiple pronunciation variations. So for Alps, it might be that there's nothing on the lips. It might be an A, there might be an A and an L, and there may be an A, an L and a P, there may be an A and an L, P and an A. And so you can have multiple variations. Then we can use standard kind of forced alignment techniques to try and work out which one best explains the data, right? And that's kind of the way good old-fashioned HMMs work. Force them to fit your data, and then reiterate over it. So we did this, and this allowed us to sort of automatically, well, in a weekly supervised manner, basically, force align. So we didn't need to know. We didn't need that annotation of where the specific phonemes or visemes are on the lips. And that gave us a bolster to performance. What it was training was sort of like, was person independent, everything was great. But really it was like, this was the point where we moved to neural networks in 2015. So just swapping out the kind of the AAMs, active appearance models, HMMs, for more modern technology instantly gave us this performance increase. And this led in in 2016 to this 1 million hand CNN. So what we did is we took sign and video, we force aligned the data, and that allowed us to automatically basically segment into, because if we've got a dictionary and the linguists have told us what hand shapes are already in that dictionary, then basically we could do it as if it was speech. And so we force aligned this. We had a CNN, which was effectively the emission probability for HMM in a force alignment process. Force aligned 1 million frames, trained this CNN, and then magically you had something that could cope with this older data. So you can sort of see here, this is some video from the Phoenix data set. This is the hand shapes. It's the most likely hand shape it can see. And this is but it was trained on this data. This is just some random video from the internet, and you can see actually it generalizes fairly well. And it's actually this that formed the basis of that annotation tool. And we've gradually, through projects and projects now, added more and more data from different sources sort of into it. So the hand classifier is getting stronger and stronger. But it was really when we moved to sequence models that changed things. So up until that point, we'd been working on forced alignment. And then in subunits, which was GHAN in 2017, we started playing with things like CTC losses. So here what we've got is a CNN backbone, we've got some BLSTMs, and then we've got this CTC loss. And the whole point there is that we can do sequence to sequence, or sequence modeling, where we don't necessarily know where it is in there, but you can sort of see from the loss here that it will find the frame or the portion of the video where it gets its anchor. And we did this. When we did this work, we also were still trying to put these inductive priors in. So we had streams of the network that were dedicated to hands and faces, some of the things that we knew were linguistically important. But then we kind of moved on to NMT, the neural machine translation. And I have to, I'm honest, we looked to what was going on in the language, and we quite often, as it goes on in vision, we beg, borrow, and steal techniques from other areas, and then turn them to our own nefarious purposes. So, but this was a bit of a landmark, because it was the first time. Everything I've talked about up until now was very much recognition, and this allowed us now with these sequence models to go for translation. So here we've got a sign language video. And here what we've got is a gloss. So this gloss is what the linguists would do. They would go through and sort of say, well, from here to here, it's this sign. From here to here, it's this sign. And then down here at the bottom, you've got the German and the English translation. And then just to show you the mapping, we've drawn some arrows between the two. And what you can see is that obviously there's a monotonic relationship between the gloss and the video, because by definition, that's what it is. It's just it's this sign followed by this sign. But you've got this more complex relationship between the two. So this demonstrates that it really is a translation problem. It's word ordering, and that's even ignoring all of these other things I talked about before. So what we did is we started off with encoder decoder models, and in 2018, again on this Phoenix data set, we built the first neural machine translation pipeline, where we had continuous video coming in. So we've got a backbone, and then we've got this encoder, decoder, NMT architecture that would do the translation for us. But we were going via a gloss representation. And actually that was limiting us, because if we go via the gloss, and we needed to go via the gloss representation, because otherwise there weren't enough constraints to train the model. But if you go via a gloss representation, that means all of your data needs to be annotated with gloss. And that's what's incredibly expensive. And what we need to do to be able to throw vast amounts of data is to remove any of these constraints. Right? So in 2020, we moved over to transformers, but importantly, we broke this reliance on the gloss. So here, what we've got is a transformer doing the translation. And to constrain the network, we've still got the gloss information in there, but it's attached. It's not a bottleneck. It's there as kind of as supplementary supervision in the with the CTC loss. So we're kind of bringing together some of these different sequence-to-sequence approaches to try and, yes, well, what we want to do is to scale up to near limitless amounts of data. We also, GR the same year, we did some multi-channel again, sort of like turn into those kind of what we know from linguistics. And so we know that the different channels are important. And we've constantly got this argument in-house about why are we giving it a full image when we know that the face is the hand. You know, if you give it a full image, the first thing the network does is it attends to the hands and ignores the face. But we know there's information content in the face. So, you know, why make the network's job harder than it needs to be? And just to show you some examples, so this is from that Phoenix data set. So here we've got like a video sequence, we've got the original, this is the ground truth. So this is what basically the anchor, news anchor is saying, or the weather anchor. And then we've got the translation that's coming out of the system. And you know, it's pretty good. Strong rain against the next few hours, first in the west, then on the coast. And in the next few days, it will be heavy rain, especially in the west. You know, so it's not a bad translation. The problem is that nobody cares about weather. All right, you know, this is such a small. What makes this work is it's a small domain of discourse. And if you ask a deaf person, what they'll go is, I don't need to know. I can see the map. Why do I need to? You know, I don't need weather broadcasts. But the trouble is, we are where speech was in the 1970s. You know, so what we're trying to do at the moment is gradually find the next domain of discourse. What's the next level of complexity we can go to? The trouble is, it's very difficult to find it. And we seem to constantly just be going, oh, well, we'll just have to do it on any domain of discourse with any old data. Now, I said I've always shied away from sign production. There's not many slides left, honest Gov. So, and the reason I stayed away from sign production is that typically deaf communities hate it. You show them an avatar, and they kind of look at it and just go, well, that doesn't look like a person. It's awful. Why would I care? But that's when everything tended to be quite deterministic. And all of a sudden we had all of the new machinery available to us. And so what we did is well, can we take this transformer that seems to be doing quite a good job at translating, going from video to text, can we turn it on its head? Can we generate skeletons directly from the text? So, you know, can we animate and do the translation? And that's when we came up with these progressive transformers. So this is Ben published last year at ECCV, and there's been several papers that build up upon this idea. And basically the idea is to take that translation, that neural machine translation architecture, and make it regress a skeleton. We have to drive it. And so we've got this way, it's progressive transformer. There's effectively like a little clock in there. So we force it to go forwards to put the time back in. And this is kind of what we get. So here we've got an input German sentence. And then we've got two skeletons. One is the ground truth, which is when we've trapped this video with OpenPose. And then this is the output of that progressive transformer. And actually, we kind of went, oh my God, it works really well. The thing is that there's lots of problems with this. So it's very under-articulated. And we found that we're losing a lot of the information that we need. It's also, it works because of the domain of discourse. And as soon as you try and scale this, it starts to fall on its face. So I'm not saying we've solved it, and there's lots of problems with these skeletons, but I mean, we're still working on this. So that was a good step in the right direction. Now the skeletons still need work. And like I say, it's far from perfect. But this for us was really exciting because actually, if we can, you know, this is maybe a way of breaking the kind of robotic approach that you tend to see in avatars, you know, because actually if we can drive it from real data, then maybe we can make it look much more fluid and like people. But everyone hates the skeletons, right? You know, so if you show the skeleton to a deaf person, they just go, I can't understand it. Well, that's not a person. And so what we also looked at was whether we could use GANs to generate photorealism. That's where we came up with this idea of V-Sign. And V-Sign really is just a photorealistic video generation system. It's able to generate high quality videos. The idea we're trying to pitch this is we're not trying to replace the interpreter. So actually, I think this using a GAN to generate video has got a huge market, because if you drive it from a human, then it's still got the quality of that interpreting, because we haven't cracked the translation problem yet. But there are huge issues with things like anonymity. Now, if you think from our point of view, if you put your opinion on a blog somewhere and you type it, well, it's holy cow 36 wrote this message, right? And so you've got absolute anonymity there. If you're deaf and you want to leave a message somewhere, then in your native language, you're leaving a video of yourself. There is no anonymity. So actually, just being able to reskin in itself from one person to another has huge applications. So this system is basically a conditional GAN, right? So what we've got is we can take a video in, we can do some real-time skeletal extraction. So we've got this skeleton, and then we use that skeleton to condition a GAN with whatever the appearances we want, and that allows us to generate a different person within that pose and animate them. We can also control what that person looks like by changing the conditioning, and the best thing to do is just show you some examples. So on the left, this is Barbara. Barbara is this is what she's actually going to say, and she's a native deaf interpreter that works in Switzerland. And this is us extracting this skeletal data, and then this is the output of the GAN, which is being conditioned on that skeletal data. And then I can do the same thing. This is Michaela. So Michaela is a hearing interpreter, also who works in Switzerland, and I can use her to animate the same model. And I can even take some fat old bloke who doesn't know, who only knows BSL, and I can animate the GAN from me as well. The slightly distressing thing is that I make the GAN look older. And again, this is not perfect, but you can sort of, like, if you just on a frame by frame basis, it's remarkably good. And people got really excited by this. The deaf community get very excited because for the first time, you're showing them something that looks like a real person. And as long as we're animating, it's being driven by a real person, it works well. But obviously, we're still working on how to do the underlying translation in the background. So it's not perfect, work in progress. People are getting very excited because it looks like a person or an avatar, etc., etc. And this is just this is one of the more recent ones. So this is Clive, who's a very famous interpreter in the UK, who very kindly captured as a video, and then we're driving the GAN from him. So it's kind of all work in progress, but quite exciting times, really. We've also got a paper, again, face and gesture. This is about anonymity. And so we've combined some of this technology with a VAE. And so when we're training it, we can basically train it and encode some style codes that then mean that at runtime, we can generate random style codes that allow us to generate the same sequence but with different appearances. And because the VAE basically produces a continuous space, it means that we can effectively interpolate between people and generate new people that it was never trained upon. So, and these are just some examples of appearances that come out of that style code for exactly the same pose. So, summary, right? So, limitations at the moment are to do with data. All right. So that Phoenix data set, that weather broadcast one, very narrow domain of discourse. Also, the quality of it is very low quality data. But I am literally drowning in data. Right. So in these new projects that we have got so much data that we're trying to process in the background. But the domains of discourse for that data is completely limitless. When it comes from the linguists, it's just people talking in a room. If it comes from broadcast, it's news. It's and we have captured an awful lot of data over the last couple of years, specifically from the news, because we know it was dominated by COVID. And that actually, although it doesn't really limit the domain of discourse, it does give us a lot more repetition, which makes things easier. So we recently released a data set called the C4A data set, and this is about 190 hours of broadcast footage. Only 20 hours of that are manually annotated. At the moment, a lot of the stuff that's going on in the background is about data curation, data alignment. We're trying to get the data sets, the size of the data sets that we need to basically break, the next step to, in terms of this domain of discourse. So, so at the moment, our biggest limitation is data, small domains of discourse. Like I said, we're working hard to remove them. So my aim is a translation system for conversational sign, hopefully in the near future. If you go back to that first slide, 2045, the singularity is here. So I am, time clock's ticking. I haven't got that long. Certainly, I've got to do this before I retire. And let's say one of the biggest, all of the problems we've got with data, but actually, we're coming up. It's not just about having the data; it's also the ethics of that data now. I think that society, we are getting much wiser about our data. But you've also got all of these issues. The GAN has opened a whole can of worms, because the GAN work looks like somebody. And if I train that on data that looks like you, then who owns it? And there's two parts of IP there. So when I record somebody signing, there is their appearance, but there's also, they've got IP in terms of the translation. Anyone who is bilingual, there is more than one way to translate something. So, taking any spoken language and turning it into sign, that's their IP. That's the way that they would translate it. So yeah, everything's getting very, very complicated, but we will get there. I mean, everybody wants to solve these problems, and we've just got to find the ways to do it in the right way. So last slide, current team working on the sign. Really exciting, because sign has always been a minor activity in the lab. I've never had this many people working on it simultaneously and had so many projects on it simultaneously. But just Gian, so Gian did his PhD, currently a research fellow, did all the NMT stuff. Yeah, he's like absolutely key to the lab. Tao, unfortunately, we just lost Tao. He had to go back to China, but he's been working with us on Extol. Ben's in the second year of his PhD, very much hoping that Ben's going to stay on and help us after he's finished his PhD. Ben's been leading on all the sign production stuff. Joe, Ryan and Walsh are new PhDs that started this year in lockdown. And then finally, just one big shout out for Oscar Collar, who did his PhD at Arken. And, all of that stuff, the earlier stuff, the Phoenix data set, and a lot of collaboration over the years. So Oscar's done a huge amounts for the field as well. But this is it, very exciting times. Yeah, got a lot to do before 2045 then. There you go.
Okay, wow. Thank you so much, Rich. That was amazing. And I can't find my applause. Oh, well. Oh, there it is. Okay.
Can I stop sharing?